I guess I really don't know what Christmas is all about.
If you're obsessed with serial killers and true crime, I have some breaking news for you all. America's most prolific serial killer, Samuel Little, just passed away a couple of hours ago at the age of 80. He confessed to killing 93 people between 1970 and 2005, and only 60 of those have been confirmed so far. The FBI is still working to investigate the remaining cases and see if they can find any connections between him and the remaining victims.
Hi guys, welcome back to Ominous October. Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27, 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin to an overly religious, abusive, and misogynistic mother and an alcoholic father who couldn't keep a job. His mother wouldn't let him and his brother have friends and eventually even moved the family to an isolated farmhouse that they could only leave for school. In school, Ed behaved oddly and would often break out into random fits of laughter. After his father died, Ed and his brother began working, getting reputations as quiet and hardworking boys. But soon, Ed's brother died in a fire on the farm with mysterious bruises on his head, leaving Ed and his mother alone. Eventually, she died of a stroke, said to be induced by seeing an unmarried woman living in her neighbor's house, and her devoted Ed was crushed. He continued working and loved reading about Nazis and cannibals until one day the local hardware store owner was gone and police went to investigate the home of the last person to see her, Ed Gein. What they found shocked the world. The shop owner's eviscerated body hanging in a shed, clothes made of human skin, human skull bowls, faces made into masks, a nipple belt, and many other miscellaneous human remains. Though he only killed twice, Ed is known for being one of the most disturbed people in history, explaining his actions only by saying, "I had a compulsion to do it."
The case of Darlie Rotier. On June 6, 1996, Darlie Rotier called the police saying a white male broke into her home in Rolette, Texas, and stabbed her and her two sons, Damon and Devin. While on the call, you could hear commotion, and Darlie picking up a knife after dispatch told her not to. She immediately explained this is why her fingerprints were on it. Upon arrival, the two boys passed away, and Darlie was severely injured, with a neck wound 2 millimeters from her collateral artery, as well as a deep arm wound. Just 8 days after, it was Devin's 7th birthday. Darlie was acting juvenile and spraying silly string at the gravesite. With further investigation, they found Darlie's bloody footprints underneath broken glass when she had no damage to her feet, cast-off splatter on her back consistent with her holding the knife, and no evidence of anyone else being in the house. 3 months later, she was sentenced to death by lethal injection. She is still on death row.
Sometimes things aren't always as they seem. On the 11th of March in 2011, a Lululemon manager came in for her shift in the morning when she noticed the store was unlocked. Frightened, she went to the line at the Apple store and asked a guy who had been standing in the line for a couple of hours if he had seen anything. He said that he had seen nothing, but he offered to walk into the Lululemon with her. As they walked in, it looked as though there was a robbery. Receipts everywhere and cash registers open. However, the closer that they got to the back, the more things seemed out of place. And then they saw one bloody footprint after another. When she finally got to the back, she found her coworkers who had shifts the night before. They were covered in blood and completely unresponsive. She thought they were both dead. The police and ambulances arrived immediately. One of the girls on the back, named Jana Murray, sustained 331 wounds. This was done between 5 different weapons. This killing obviously seemed personal. They went to go attend to the other girl, Brittany Norwood, and they noticed that she was still breathing. She was tied up by zip ties and had superficial wounds all over her body. Follow, share, and add me on Instagram for part 2. So this is part 2 to the Lululemon murderer. After one murder and an attempted murder, the police had to take action immediately. They started interviewing so many people that were around the Lululemon at the time and Brittany Norwood herself. Also took note at the state of the place when they found it. The alarm was turned off with a key, the tools were out everywhere, and the size of the footprint was a US 14 shoe, which is fairly big. The story was that 2 masked men broke in, beat, and assaulted the 2 girls. Police looked for weeks for 2 men that fit their description to walk by. When they finally found men that fit the description, they interrogated them and found no proof. They did find that the randomness of such a cruel act was really odd, so they went back from the beginning and interviewed Brittany again. This time, her story wasn't adding up. Once eyes turned to Brittany, a whole history of hers popped up, specifically a history of stealing things. Recently, Jana had accused Brittany of attempting to steal a pair of yoga pants, so the police found their motive. My Instagram is below, part 3 will be next. Hey guys, and welcome back for part 3 of the Lululemon murderer. The store manager that had found them specifically found everything to be odd, considering that she actually had called Jana after she had locked up the store the night before and was leaving on her way home. So why did she go back? Brittany had actually called her and stated that she had left her Metro card inside of the Lululemon, so Jana came back to let her in. The moment that Jana walked in, Brittany confronted her for going to management after she saw her steal the leggings. The argument turned to a brutal attack. Then Brittany staged the scene to look like they had both been attacked and assaulted. Then she put on a pair of size 14 shoes and left a trail of bloody footprints to make it appear as though a large man had been there. She put the superficial wounds on herself and bound her own ankles and wrists. While the police originally believed the story of the masked intruders, it did not take long for them to see through the lies. She was now the sole suspect. A nearby store then reported that they heard two women arguing the night of the murder. That's when they knew for sure that they had the right person. In January of 2012, Brittany was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole.
Hi guys, welcome back to Ominous October. Elizabeth Short was born on July 29, 1924 in Hyde Park, Boston. She had 4 sisters, and it was assumed that her father committed suicide after the stock market crash. Eventually, it was discovered that she had just started a new life in California, and the new high school dropout, Elizabeth, moved in with him. Soon, however, the two began fighting and she moved out and began living with her friends and boyfriends, some of which may have abused her. After a while, the now aspiring actress moved to Hollywood. She loved wearing sleek black clothing and always had flowers in her hair, mostly dahlias. However, after a date with her married boyfriend, she remained under the radar until her dead body was found. Elizabeth Short was found naked, drained of blood, and completely severed at the waist. She had cuts on her thighs and breasts, and her intestines were tucked under her lower body. She was posed sexually with her legs spread and hands over her head. And the most disturbing part was her Glasgow smile. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears. Unfortunately, neither the LAPD nor the FBI were able to find and charge the killer of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia.
True Crime in Each State, Part 8, Minnesota. This is Paul Stephanie. He was also known as the Weepy Voice Killer. Each time he would commit a crime, he would call the police in a high-pitched, remorseful voice to anonymously report his crimes. On December 31st, 1980, Paul severely beat Karen Potak. She had several head wounds and neck wounds. Around 3 a.m., he called the police and begged them to send help for Karen and told them exactly where she was, and he was nowhere to be found. On June 3rd, 1981, he killed Kimberly Compton and again called the police to confess. On this call, he said, "I don't know why I had to stab her. I'm so upset with myself. I can't stop. I keep killing somebody." They still didn't know who he was. Barbara Simmons was his last victim. He met her at a bar and ended up giving her a ride home. He stabbed her over 40 times. He again then called the police and said, "Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. He was then caught in 1982 from a failed attempt to kill another girl. While in jail, he also confessed to drowning Kathy Greening in her own bathtub. He then died in prison in 1998 from cancer. True Crime in 60 Seconds, Christmas Edition. On Christmas Eve in 1945, it was just a normal holiday for the Sauter family. 9 out of the 10 kids were home, plus Jeannie and George Sauter. Around 10 p.m., Jeannie told the kids that they could stay up a little bit later as long as the 2 oldest boys were still awake. Then she went to bed. Around 12:30 a.m., the phone rang and Jeannie answered, and it was a woman asking for someone who didn't live at the house. So Jeannie said she had the wrong number, but she could hear the woman laughing very strangely in the background. She then hung up and went to bed. Around 1 a.m., Jeannie woke up to hearing a loud bang on the roof, but she didn't hear anything else after that, so she went back to sleep. About an hour and a half later, Jeannie woke up and she saw smoke everywhere and she realized the house was on fire. Jeannie and George and 4 of the kids made it out, but they assumed the other 5 were still inside. George then climbed to the roof, broke in, tried to save the other 5, but they weren't there. After the house burned down and they investigated, there wasn't any evidence that there were any kids in the house. There were no bones, nothing. So where did the 5 kids go? Jeannie didn't believe that all 5 of the kids' bones were completely burned because there were still some small appliances still intact from the house fire. The Sauter kids were never found and it's still a mystery to this day.